I'm delighted now to ask Jim Breslin, the Secretary-General of the Department of Children and Youth Affairs, to give a brief overview of Better Outcomes, Brighter Futures. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Taoiseach, Tánaiste, Oireachtas members, colleagues, you're very welcome. It was the Taoiseach who made the decision to establish a full cabinet member as Minister for Children and Youth Affairs, and in doing so, consequent on that, to establish a Department of Children and Youth Affairs. The formalities involved in that involved making a regulation under the Minister and Secretaries Act. Senior civil servants like me know these things. The first function that the Minister was assigned under that regulation made by the Taoiseach was to promote the development of integrated policy frameworks to enable the development and implementation of cross-departmental strategies to secure the well-being of children and young people. This is a relatively novel type of function. It's not commonly found in the responsibilities of other ministers and departments. We have given a lot of thought as to how we might achieve that function and support the Minister in doing so. The Minister has mentioned some of the achievements since coming into office around specific areas like establishing TUSLA, children's detention, preschool quality. I would not want to say that they're by any means simple and straightforward. They're not. However, they are more in our direct control. They are more amenable to us making legislation and seeing things happen, as we've seen the publication of Children First this week. But the challenge of doing integrated policy frameworks, of doing cross-departmental strategies, demands more than that. It demands a range of new thinking and a range of new ways of working. And that's what we've tried to achieve in bringing forward this framework. We tend to compartmentalise children and young people. I'm working on education welfare policy, so my concern is school attendance. I do youth justice policy. I'd like to divert young people from crime. I'm in the Department of Health. My focus is on waiting lists or healthier lifestyles. But we know that good health status contributes to good educational outcomes. And we know that progress in education contributes to economic opportunity. So in the lives of children and young people, everything is connected. Better outcomes, brighter futures says it's time for our policies to be connected too. As I say, today represents a milestone in our ambitions for children and young people. It's the culmination of a lot of work involving very many people who are in the audience today. These inputs influence the shaping of the framework right from the very start. They shape the 5 national outcomes and the accompanying transformational goals. They shape the emphasis on whole of government, which is represented here today by the presence of the Taoiseach and the Tánaiste. And the one message that we got was implementation, implementation, implementation. Vision is all very well, but we want to see steady progress. Show us a roadmap, show us how we can do it. So the input from people shapes not just our thinking, but also the final product. And as we consulted in the run-up to finalisation, we worked with many of you on a draft. I hope that you consider the document that you see today, when you have the time to review it, as having reflected your input, at least in part. And I hope that you already feel you have a stake in its implementation. Just to highlight some of the people that we've worked with throughout this process, we consulted and got a response from 67,700 children and young people. We did a public consultation and 1,000 submissions were received. People feel very motivated when you ask them about children and young people. We worked with the National Children's Advisory Council, and Owen Keenan, who you will hear from later, chairs the National Children's Advisory Council. And the Advisory Council was really of huge benefit to us, both in shaping our thinking and in feeding back as the document took shape. We worked with the Early Years Advisory Group, and there is an early years strategy which will be developed shortly and will show the full imprint of the work of that group, which was very detailed and significant. But we've already started to pick ideas and take some of the recommendations on board, and they're set out in the document. We worked with the National Youth Work Advisory Committee, and similarly, both in the input to this framework and in the development of the youth strategy later this year, we'll be working closely with the National Youth Work Advisory Council. We had the great benefit of the Centre for Effective Services, and I'd like to pay tribute to Nuala Doherty, Katie Burke in particular, who gave us really good evidence as we went forward on this. I'd also like to mention the ESRI, who we drew upon the Growing Up in Ireland work to shape the document. We had a series of cross-departmental bilateral meetings where the individual commitments that the Minister has highlighted were worked through in fine detail, so that we now have the authority with the government to commit not just Department of Children and Youth Affairs, but all departments that are listed in this document to the delivery of those commitments. And I would also like to mention the Secretary-General's group, and I know a number of colleagues are in the audience. We particularly worked with the Secretary-General's group on implementation and trying to get the benefit of their expertise and experience in how we could set our document and set the framework up for success. So, what have we got? We have an overarching vision, and this draws upon the Programme for Government, which said that Ireland wants to be one of the best small countries in which to grow up and to raise a family. And we've built upon that to say where the rights of all children and young people are respected, protected and fulfilled, where their voices are heard and where they are supported to realise their maximum potential now and in the future. The document sets out 5 national outcomes and detail attaching to all of those. They are what we not only represent as what we want to work on, but also as a country, the agreed national outcomes that we want to see for our children and young people. Each outcome has a series of commitments and a nominated lead department. So what we tried to do by getting sponsorship from 5 different departments on each outcome area was to make this truly a whole of government enterprise. Active and Healthy will be sponsored by the Department of Health. Learning and Developing, sponsored by the Department of Education and Skills. Safe and Protected will be sponsored by the Department of Children and Youth Affairs itself. Economic Security and Opportunity by the Department of Social Protection. And Connected and Respected will be taken forward by the Department of Environment, Community and Local Government in concert with other departments. The document also sets out a series of transformational goals. These are the changes that we believe will bring us towards better outcomes. We want to support parents. The starting point for this is that families are the foundation stone upon which better outcomes will be delivered for children and young people. And it's with families and parents that we want to work to support them to give what they aspire to for their children and young people. The first action in that area will be the publication this summer of a parenting and family support statement, which will inform our work in this area. Earlier intervention and prevention. This is threaded throughout all of the range of commitments. The strong policy direction is for TUSLA and a range of other statutory and voluntary partners to intervene earlier and more effectively. For example, there's significant evidence now available, including from some of the work that we've done with Atlantic Philanthropies, on the benefit of home visiting, particularly in the antenatal and early childhood development period. And so one of the commitments here is that the 2 departments, Health and Children and Youth Affairs, TUSLA and the HSE, will work together to develop initiatives in this area. one of the transformational goals is to listen to and involve children and young people. This is not just about in the implementation of the framework, but is about the engagement of children and young people and their participation in every service setting. Ensuring quality services. For example, we know that there are significant issues remaining about how different sectors work together on children's disability. The coordination of the response from these different sectors can be improved upon. It's a broad and a challenging area, but there are specific commitments in this that the Department of Children and Youth Affairs, Health and Education will work together to address these issues, particularly as it relates to children's participation in early years settings where they have a disability. The document highlights transitions as a very vulnerable period for children, particularly as, for example, they move from primary school into secondary school, as they move from children's health services into adult health services, and as they move from being children in care into independent living. So there are a range of areas of focus to try and work with children as they move through those disruptive transitions. And I hope you'll have got the message at this stage that the document and the framework have at its heart the idea of cross-government interagency collaboration. And I'd say something a little bit more about that in terms of implementation. This is how we see this hanging together. We have a series of strategic goals, transformational goals that we will work on a cross-departmental and cross-sectoral basis. And they will bring us, we believe, towards greater achievement around the specific outcomes outlined. And we have baseline information on children and young people's current performance in terms of these outcomes, and we'll measure that as we go through the 7-year period. A critical issue for us is to deliver on the aspirations that are set out. This starts at government and works its way down through the Cabinet Committee on Social Policy. It has a whole of government ownership, the participation of all relevant departments. It has key indicators and monitoring, including public annual reporting. It has an implementation team to link each of the elements together. And I think really importantly, this is not just about working on policy at national level. This is about working locally on implementation. And so it has both national and local structures. The national and the whole of government starts with the government itself. And we have had the active support of all ministers and all departments, and they've thumbed through the document at this stage. And I know are in the process of having the dialogue in each of their parent departments saying, how can we move this forward? And that's the type of leadership that we've got as we've worked through this process. But it also involves local implementation. We currently have 16 children's services committees at various stages of development in counties around Ireland. This is an example of a particularly effective Children's Services Committee in Kerry, where they tend to take on the county spirit particularly strongly. And this is the principle that all of the people currently working in children and young people services, both statutory and voluntary, in a county will come together. And they will now have the benefit of the Better Outcomes, Brighter Futures framework to implement on their interagency working. So this is the overarching structures, and I mentioned a number of them. Cabinet Committee on Social Policy. The consortium will draw together both senior officials across government departments, and it will also have strong representation from the community and voluntary sector through the leadership of the Advisory Council. The sponsors group within that are the 5 lead government departments for each outcome area, and the implementation team will be drawn from personnel in the Department of Children and Youth Affairs and will work across all of these elements. I mentioned Children's Services Committees, and their voice will be represented in the consortium through the National Steering Group on Children's Services Committees, which is chaired by Sheila Ryan. The Advisory Council, which the Minister has nominated Owen Keenan to chair, and you'll hear from Owen in a moment, will represent the entirety of the framework and the entirety of the age range. It will also, in subgroup format, convene to cover particular areas, principally early years and youth, which are both in the process of having national strategies developed for those areas. So it will be both an overarching advisory council, but also it will have the opportunity to look in more detail at particular aspects, and when it does so, involve greater membership. And we have fully designed into the process the continued engagement with children and young people themselves. And we have the opportunity to work with both the Corlin and Og and the structured dialogue process, where you'll hear from both Ella and Anthony shortly on how we can take that forward. Can I say a little word just on the Department of Children and Youth Affairs? Because in thanking people earlier on and in talking about the contribution, I do want to highlight the work that has gone on within the department in getting us to this point. They're going to be very busy people on the implementation, but they certainly deserve great credit today. Particularly Moira O'Mara. Moira has led this process amongst all her other responsibilities. Dara Doherty, who we lost recently to the Department of Social Protection, but will be over there a very strong advocate for the detail of the framework and the amount of work and effort he put into it. We recently have assigned Conor Rowley and Vera McGrath to this area, and they've been strongly supported by Stephen O'Brien. We had the benefit of people outside the department. Maria Corbett, who people will know from the Children's Rights Alliance and the National Children's Advisory Council. Maria volunteered her time and her expertise to the process and made a significant input. And the process has also benefited hugely from Emma Lane Spollen. Emma's involvement started last year, and she, in doing so, has become, I think at this stage, an honorary member of the Department of Children and Youth Affairs. The document bears the quality of her input, and I think is all the better for it. So next steps. We want to work smartly in the implementation of this framework. And I say starting today, the consortium at 3:30 will have its first meeting. So we want to get quickly up and running, bring all of these elements to life and start to deliver on commitments. We want to prioritise some difficult issues. I didn't necessarily think of that, but the Minister said it to me. Don't be picking the easy ones. We have a few that are intractable, and we want to get those on the agenda and get moving on them. So we will do that. We'll bring about some transparent reporting and ongoing engagement with you nationally and locally. There's lots of specific commitments, as the Minister has highlighted. But the overall focus, let's not lose sight of it, is to achieve cultural change and better ways of working. And that's in order to produce better outcomes and brighter futures. Tony Bates, who I think might be here, I saw him down as attending, Tony from Headstrong, and if you are, Tony, you're very welcome. Tony Bates from Headstrong has contributed a very powerful thought, I think, which is that when Headstrong have done their research with UCD, they found that children's mental health and their ability to cope is very, very strongly influenced by the presence of one good, solid adult in their lives and the powerful difference that that can make in times when they need it. This could be one of the 55,000 teachers. It could be one of the 1,400 workers in the youth services. It could be one of 1,300 social workers. It could be one of 20,000 preschool staff. It could be one of the 120 or more juvenile liaison officers in the guards. It could be 750 staff within child and adolescent mental health. It could be 1,500 public health nurses. It could be one of 800 or so speech and language therapists. It could be one of the 3,000 staff that are in our major paediatric hospitals. It could be one of the many other staff and workers within the voluntary and community sector and from a range of other organisations and disciplines. That is the privilege and the opportunity that we have. The lives of children and young people require our policies and services to be connected. The success will be when our policies are joined up and we support staff to do what is right and effective in looking at the whole child and the better outcomes and brighter future that they can achieve with our support. Thank you.
Thank Thank you very much indeed, Jim. And I think it's very powerful to hear Jim speaking about those thousands of workers out there who want to do the very best for children. It's really, as well as their parents, of course, and families, all of those who work with children, and the impact that each and every one of us can have for the better with children. It's very good, I think, to be reminded of that. Sometimes I think the frontline pressures, we can forget that sometimes about the great impact that individual workers do have on children.